My parasite sister wanted to turn my house into an Airbnb. I refused. Her husband broke the door and broke in. The dream of peace, the one we'd poured our savings and sanity into, shattered with the crunch of unexpected tires on our new gravel driveway. Liam and I, Sophia, hadn't even finished arranging the damn throw pillows on the sofa of our lake house, this supposed sanctuary miles from the city, and more importantly, miles from his family. But there they were, my sister-in-law, Chloe, a woman whose sense of entitlement could power a small city, her husband, Derek, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically removed at birth, and their two children, Max and Lily, miniature agents of chaos. And leading the charge, or rather, orchestrating it with the smug satisfaction of a battlefield general, was my mother-in-law, Mrs. Evans. Liam's shoulders, which had been relaxed just moments before as he admired the view, tensed into a familiar, weary line. Our first weekend, our haven, was already under siege before we'd even had a chance to brew a pot of coffee. Well now, isn't this something? Chloe's voice, always a few decibels too loud, boomed through the open doorway before she even stepped inside, her tone less appreciative and more appraising. She didn't walk in, she made an entrance, her eyes darting around our newly furnished living room, not with warmth, but with a disturbing, almost tangible possessiveness. Derek mumbled a greeting that was lost in the ensuing whirlwind, while Max and Lily, true to form, immediately spotted the untouched bowl of welcome snacks on the kitchen island and made a shrieking, sticky-fingered beeline for it. Mrs. Evans simply beamed, a proprietary smile plastered on her face. "Oh, Liam, Chloe dear, it's just wonderful. You've done so very well, haven't you?" The unspoken addendum hung in the air, thick and cloying, and therefore you owe us. A lot. Liam pasted on a smile that looked more like a grimace. Mom, Chloe, Derek, welcome. The words felt like gravel in his own mouth. We hadn't even invited them for this first look, a fact conveniently ignored by all parties involved. Chloe, predictably, cut straight to the chase, bypassing any pretense of social nicety. She perched on the edge of our brand new armchair, the one I'd agonized over for weeks, as if it were a throne from which to issue decrees. "So, Liam," she began, her voice dripping with a syrupy sweetness that always preceded an outrageous demand. "Derek and I were thinking on the drive up. This place is cute, real cute. But you know what it really is? It's a gold mine, an absolute, untapped gold mine." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This wasn't going to be about admiring the view. "It's got potential," she continued, waving a dismissive hand at our carefully chosen rustic modern decor. "A bit too cabiny for my taste. But the location? Chef's kiss. Prime for an Airbnb, Liam. Prime." Liam, who had been reaching for the coffee pot, froze. "An Airbnb, Chloe? We literally closed on this place 3 days ago. We haven't even slept here yet." His voice was dangerously quiet. "Exactly," Chloe chirped, utterly oblivious to the storm clouds gathering in Liam's eyes. "No time like the present, little brother. You're chained to that desk in the city. Sophia's got her little career thing. You'll be lucky if you use this place once a month. It's a waste, a crying shame. But us?" She puffed out her chest, gesturing vaguely at Derek, who just blinked owlishly. "We've got time, I've got time, I can manage it all. The listings, the guests, the cleaning. I even know a girl who does amazing staging. We'll rake it in. 50-50 on the profits, minus my small management fee, say 25%. It's a gift, Liam. A gift horse you shouldn't look in the mouth." My own mouth had fallen open. She wasn't asking. She was dictating terms for a hostile takeover of our dream. Liam's composure finally snapped. "Chloe," he said, each word a carefully controlled icicle. "That is not happening. This is not your next get-rich-quick scheme. This is our home, our private escape. End of discussion." A truly ugly expression flashed across Chloe's face, a fleeting glimpse of the grasping, resentful core beneath the bubbly veneer, before she quickly rearranged her features into a mask of wounded innocence. "Oh, Liam, don't be so stingy," she wheedled, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Think of the family. We're struggling, you know. Derek's hours have been cut again, and the kids need so much. This could be our lifeline. You wouldn't deny your only sister, your blood, a chance to get ahead, would you? Especially when you're sitting on something this valuable?" The emotional blackmail was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Liam's jaw was visibly clenched. He'd lifelined them more times than he could count, each loan disappearing into the black hole of their chronic financial mismanagement. Mrs. Evans, ever Chloe's enabler-in-chief, immediately chimed in, her voice oozing saccharine concern. "Liam, darling, your sister is right. It's far too much house for just 2 people. And Chloe is so resourceful. You should be proud to help her. It's what families do." "Mom," Liam's voice was strained, tight with years of suppressed frustration. "This isn't about helping. This is about them demanding to turn our private refuge into their personal income stream without so much as a buy your leave. It's not happening." Derek, sensing his cue from Chloe's thunderous expression, puffed up his chest slightly. "Yeah, Liam, listen to your mom. Don't be such a tightwad. We'd probably use it more than you anyway." Max and Lily, seizing the opportunity presented by the escalating adult tension, had now discovered a decorative bowl of smooth gray river stones on the coffee table. With delighted shrieks, they began pelting each other, the stones skittering across the new hardwood floor. One, thrown with surprising force by Max, connected with the base of a floor lamp, sending it wobbling precariously and chipping the ceramic. Neither Chloe nor Derek so much as glanced their way. I, however, did. "Max, Lily, stop that right now!" I snapped, my patience gone. Chloe whirled on me, her eyes narrowed. "Honestly, Sophia, they're just children having fun. It's a lake house, not Buckingham Palace. Don't be such a killjoy." A killjoy, I sputtered incredulous. They just broke our lamp, Chloe. She waved a perfectly manicured hand dismissively. Oh, please, it's a tiny chip. Liam can buy 10 more. You city people are so uptight about your things. The contempt in her voice was palpable. Liam stepped between us, his face a thundercloud. Enough, Chloe, he stated, his voice low and dangerous. This visit is over. You are not turning our home into an Airbnb, and you will control your children, or you will leave. Now. Chloe stared at him, genuinely aghast, as if he'd sprouted a second head. The idea that he, Liam, her perpetually compliant younger brother, would actually stand up to her, would actually say no and mean it, seemed to short-circuit her brain. Then, the theatrics began. Her face crumpled. Final? You dare use that word with me, Liam? After I sacrificed my youth looking after you? After Mom and Dad poured everything into your education while I got nothing? It was her standard, well-rehearsed, and entirely fictitious sob story. What sacrifices, Chloe? Liam's voice was raw. The ones where you partied your way through Dad's savings? The 6 times I've had to bail you and Derek out of debt because of your bad luck? Mrs. Evans gasped, clutching her pearls. Liam, how dare you? Your sister only wants what's best for her family. You're being cruel, buying this enormous place and not even offering to share. Mr. Evans, who had been a silent, uncomfortable witness, finally cleared his throat. Liam, perhaps a small compromise, he offered weakly, avoiding everyone's eyes. Chloe pounced. See, Liam? Dad agrees. It's not unreasonable. We'd barely be here. Unless you just don't want me to have anything good. Is that it? You're jealous. It was a breathtaking leap of illogic, but classic Chloe. Liam looked utterly defeated for a moment, the weight of their combined expectations pressing down on him. But then, something in him seemed to solidify. A new, steely resolve entered his eyes. No, Chloe, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unexpected weight of finality. This isn't about jealousy. This is about respect. This is our home. Our decision. And the decision is no. Not now. Not ever. I'm sorry. He then looked at Max and Lily, who were now attempting to use the fireplace mantle as a balance beam. Kids, off. Now. His tone was flat, non-negotiable. They actually stopped. Chloe's face was a mask of disbelief, then pure, unadulterated rage. Fine, she shrieked, her voice cracking. Be a selfish bastard, Liam. Rot in your precious house alone. Don't you ever ask me or Mom for anything again? Derek, children, we are leaving this monument to selfishness. Derek scrambled to obey. Mrs. Evans delivered her parting shot. I have never been so disappointed in you, Liam. You've broken your family's heart today. Then they were gone, the front door slamming with a violence that vibrated through the floorboards. The silence that descended was heavy, suffocating, not peaceful at all. Liam sank onto the sofa, running a hand through his hair. The nerve, he whispered. The absolute, unmitigated nerve. I sat beside him, the chipped lamp, a small, tangible symbol of the morning's wreckage. Welcome to the gold mine, Soph, he said, a bitter smile playing on his lips. The first prospectors just tried to jump our claim. The battle for our sanctuary, I realized with a sinking heart, had only just begun. The slamming of our front door that morning was not an end, but a declaration of war, a war Chloe intended to wage on multiple fronts, primarily digital. The immediate aftermath of their stormy departure was a relentless barrage, a carefully orchestrated campaign of electronic harassment designed to grind us down, our cell phones, which we naively hoped would be filled with congratulatory messages about the new house or plans for actual relaxing weekends, instead became conduits for Chloe's bitterness and Mrs. Evans's escalating disappointment. The text from Chloe began within an hour of her leaving, a rapid-fire succession of guilt-laden pronouncements and thinly veiled accusations. I can't believe you'd value bricks and mortar over your own sister, Liam. Family is supposed to come first. Clearly you've forgotten that. Followed swiftly by, Mom is an absolute wreck because of your cruelty. She hasn't stopped crying. I hope you're satisfied. And then, the classic martyr play. Don't worry about us, we'll be fine. We always are. Some of us know how to struggle and survive without fancy lake houses to escape to. Derek, never one for originality, chimed in with his own brand of misspelled, passive-aggressive support for his wife's offensive. Real nice, Liam. Show your true colors, why don't you? And some people get a little money and forget where they came from. Shameful. It was a constant, draining hum of negativity, a digital water torture designed to erode Liam's resolve. He tried, initially, to engage, to reason, to explain his position yet again, tapping out carefully worded responses that emphasized his love for his family, but also his right to his own property and peace. It was, predictably, like trying to negotiate a ceasefire with a hornet's nest. Each reasoned reply was met with a fresh volley of emotional blackmail or outright insults. Sophia, whose patience for this particular brand of familial dysfunction was considerably thinner than Liam's, was blunt. Liam, honey, they're not interested in a discussion, she said late one evening, gently taking his phone from his hand after he'd spent nearly half an hour composing a text that Chloe would undoubtedly twist or ignore. They're interested in wearing you down until you give them what they want. It's a war of attrition, and right now, you're letting them dictate the terms. Block them. For your own sanity, just block their numbers. You've said your piece. He hesitated. The ingrained familial loyalty, the deeply conditioned desire to be the good son and good brother, warring with his mounting frustration and a dawning understanding of the futility of it all. But after a particularly vile text from Chloe that evening, one that insinuated I, Sophia, was a gold-digging interloper who had poisoned him against his own loving family, he finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, did it. The sudden, blessed silence from that quarter was a profound, if unsettling, relief. Of course, blocking their direct numbers didn't stop Chloe entirely. It merely forced her to become more creative in her methods of harassment. The phone calls, often from no caller ID numbers or routed through Mrs. Evans's phone, were, if anything, worse than the texts. Chloe, it turned out, possessed a truly astonishing talent for performative grief. She could conjure tears on demand, her voice thick with unshed, or perhaps very shed for dramatic effect, sorrow as she recounted long, rambling, often contradictory tales of her mounting, and, as far as we could ascertain, largely self-inflicted and frequently exaggerated, financial woes, her various vague but alarming health scares, the myriad deprivations supposedly being suffered by Max and Lily. Always, with a relentless, laser-like precision, circling back to how the lake house Airbnb, their potential Airbnb, could have been, should have been, her salvation, their family's lifeline, the magical solution to all their problems. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, a virtuoso performance worthy of an Oscar, or at least a recurring role on a particularly melodramatic daytime soap opera. Then came the insidious social media stunt, a relatively small but intensely infuriating little twist in her ongoing campaign of psychological warfare, clearly designed to provoke and to assert a false narrative. Liam, idly scrolling through his Instagram feed one evening, attempting to find some mindless distraction from the unrelenting family drama, suddenly stiffened beside me on the sofa. He wordlessly handed me his phone, his expression a tight, grim mask of disbelief and simmering disgust. Chloe had posted a carefully curated series of artfully angled, sun-drenched photographs of our lake house interior, the spacious living room with its stone fireplace, the gleaming new kitchen with its quartz countertops, even a beautifully framed shot of the serene view from the master bedroom deck, a view we had barely had a chance to enjoy ourselves. These were clearly photos she had surreptitiously snapped during her brief, unwelcome, and highly critical tour on that first disastrous day. The captions accompanying these stolen glimpses into our private sanctuary were masterpieces of deliberate, infuriating vagueness and misleading implication, enjoying some much-needed weekend vibes at the family retreat. So peaceful here. Number blessed, number family time, number lake life, number making memories. Another read under a photo of our sofa, the one her kids had nearly destroyed. Nothing like a quiet getaway to recharge the batteries and dream big. Feeling grateful for these moments. Number retreat number, peaceful vibes, number family first. The implication, to any casual scroller or one of her blissfully unaware online friends, was glaringly, insultingly obvious. She was brazenly presenting our home, our brand new, hard-earned, and intensely personal home as her own, or at the very least, as a shared family property, to which she had free, frequent, and entirely welcome access. It was a petty, dishonest, incredibly galling power play, designed to annoy us, certainly, but also, I suspected, with a growing sense of unease, to create a false narrative for her online audience, perhaps even to subtly test our boundaries to see just how much she could get away with before we exploded. She's actually trying to manifest it into existence through Instagram, Liam said, a muscle twitching uncontrollably in his jaw, his voice dangerously low. She's trying to socially engineer a claim on our property. Next, she'll be photoshopping herself onto the damn deed and sending out professionally printed change of address cards with a goddamn loon on them. The most disheartening, soul-crushing, and frankly maddening part of this whole miserable affair, however, was Mrs. Evans's complete, unwavering, almost cult-like capitulation to Chloe's increasingly outlandish and self-serving narrative. Every single phone call from her, and despite Liam's now active attempts to limit contact, she still managed to get through with a persistence that bordered on harassment, usually by calling from unknown numbers or by ambushing him when he was least expecting it, like during his lunch break or late in the evening, was a fresh, expertly delivered wave of guilt, recrimination, and thinly veiled disappointment. Liam, your sister called me again today, absolutely beside herself, in floods and floods of tears. She'd invariably begin, her voice heavy with a syrupy, accusatory reproach that made Liam visibly flinch and a muscle jump in his temple. She told me, in the most harrowing, heartbreaking detail, Liam, how you two basically, cruelly, threw her and poor, bewildered Derek and those two innocent, precious children out into the metaphorical cold, with no thought for their feelings or their well-being. She said Sophia, and here her voice would drop to a conspiratorial, scandalized whisper, was so incredibly rude, so dismissive and condescending to the children, making them feel utterly unwelcome and out of place in their own uncle's house. She even confided in me, poor darling, that she feels Sophia looks down on us on our side of the family because we're not as successful or as sophisticated or as wealthy as her people clearly are. I, Sophia, was apparently the new conveniently designated villain in this ongoing family melodrama, the calculating, cold-hearted, city-bred Jezebel who was systematically, maliciously turning her good, kind, formerly dutiful son against his loving, long-suffering, and entirely blameless family. It was a classic, if infuriatingly effective, deflection tactic, a way to shift all blame from Chloe's outrageous behavior onto an external, easily demonized target, and Miss Evans, bless her willfully, determinedly blind heart, swallowed it whole, hook, line, and sinker, without a single critical question, without a moment's doubt or hesitation. She never once paused in her righteous indignation to consider Chloe's long, extensive, and well-documented history of exaggeration, manipulation, and outright bald-faced fabrication. She never once entertained the fleeting, uncomfortable possibility that her precious, perpetually victimized daughter might be, heaven forbid, lying through her perfectly whitened teeth. You need to apologize to your sister, Liam. Mrs. Evans would inevitably insist, her voice hardening with maternal righteousness and a deep sense of aggrievement on Chloe's behalf. A sincere, heartfelt, and public apology, I think, is what's called for here. And you really should reconsider her Airbnb idea. It was a perfectly sensible proposal, and it's the very least you can do after hurting her feelings so profoundly, after making her feel so rejected, so unloved, so disposable. She even confided in me, poor, sensitive darling, that you had practically promised her, sworn on a stack of Bibles, that she could use the house whenever she wanted for her little business venture to help her get on her feet, and then you cruelly, inexplicably, went back on your solemn word, probably because Sophia put her foot down and objected, not wanting to share your good fortune. That last part, the solemn promise, was an entirely new, particularly galling and utterly shameless fabrication, a freshly woven, brightly colored thread in Chloe's increasingly elaborate tapestry of lies and deceit. Liam, needless to say, had made no such promise, not even a vaguely implied, carelessly worded one. His initial refusal had been polite but firm, and it had only escalated because of Chloe's refusal to accept it. Mom, that is an absolute, unequivocal, and frankly insulting lie, Liam would state, and his voice tight with a frustration that was rapidly becoming his default emotional state whenever he was forced to interact with his maternal unit. His usual patience, his ingrained desire to keep the peace, was being eroded daily by this relentless onslaught of baseless accusations and emotional manipulation. Chloe is twisting everything beyond all recognition, beyond any semblance of the truth. We didn't throw them out, Mom. They stormed out in a monumental huff after I respectfully but firmly refused to let them turn our private, personal home, a home we worked incredibly hard for, into their personal, unregulated, and entirely unearned cash cow. And Sophia, he added, his voice warming slightly when he spoke my name, has been nothing but extraordinarily patient, understanding, and remarkably polite in the face of some truly appalling, disrespectful, and frankly, quite shocking behavior from your daughter and her husband. But Mrs. Evans, cocooned securely in her impenetrable fortress of denial and selective, biased hearing, was impervious to reason, to facts, to logic, to any narrative that didn't paint Chloe as a blameless victim and Liam as an ungrateful, heartless villain. Don't you dare call your sister a liar, Liam. Michael Evans, she'd retort, her voice rising in shrill indignation, a sure sign she knew she was losing the argument but was determined to win the war of wills. She wouldn't do that! She has a good, kind heart. Unlike some people I could mention, you're just being stubborn and selfish and completely ungrateful for all the blessings you've been given. You need to be the bigger person here, Liam, for the sake of family peace, for my sake, if not for anyone else's. The family peace she so ardently, so persistently, so unrealistically envisioned seemed to involve Liam and me sacrificing not only our own peace of mind, our financial security, and our clearly delineated personal boundaries, but also effectively our private property, all laid out on the perpetually burning, insatiable altar of Chloe's ever-expanding, never-satisfied sense of entitlement. It was during one of these particularly draining, circular, emotionally exhausting, and utterly pointless telephone battles with his mother, a conversation that left him looking pale, shaken, and about 10 years older, that Liam, his face a mask of helpless anger and profound, weary exhaustion, finally made the decision he'd been resisting for weeks, a decision that felt both like a defeat and a necessary act of self-preservation. I'm installing a proper, comprehensive, professional-grade security system up there, Sophia, he announced grimly after finally blessedly managing to end the call, his hand still trembling slightly as he put down the phone with a decisive click. Cameras, high-decibel motion sensors, remote monitoring, window and door alarms, the whole 9 yards. I don't trust her. I don't trust any of them not to try something monumentally stupid, something desperate. At this point, I agreed immediately, without a moment's hesitation, a wave of weary, almost shameful relief washing over me. The increasingly brazen Instagram posts, Chloe's progressively more desperate and erratic tone in her communications, and Mrs. Evans's unwavering, almost fanatical blind support for her every outrageous claim, it all felt like an ominous, inexorable, and deeply unsettling prelude to something far more brazen, far more invasive, something that could no longer be ignored or wished away. The following weekend, we drove up to the lake house, not for the relaxation and quiet enjoyment we'd once so naively, so optimistically dreamed of love, but for a grim, necessary mission of fortification. Liam had done his research and ordered a state-of-the-art, professional-grade security system, complete with multiple high-resolution, night vision motion sensor cameras designed to cover all conceivable access points, incredibly sensitive door and window alarms that would trigger at the slightest disturbance, and a remote monitoring service with direct access to local law enforcement via our smartphones. As he meticulously, methodically, and with a surprising degree of technical skill, installed each component, drilling pilot holes, running wires discreetly along baseboards, mounting cameras under the eaves, testing sensor ranges, a grim, sort of determined, almost defiant satisfaction settled over his usually easygoing features. It was, we both knew, a profoundly sad and deeply unwelcome necessity, this act of transforming our intended dream retreat, our longed-for sanctuary from the world, into a monitored, almost militarized high-tech fortress. But the alternative, leaving it vulnerable, exposed, and an open invitation to Chloe's increasingly unpredictable whims, her escalating sense of grievance, and her proven willingness to disregard our clearly stated boundaries, was simply, unequivocally unthinkable. While Liam, with his meticulous engineering background, immersed himself in the technical intricacies of the alarm system's installation and programming, I conducted a thorough, anxious, and somewhat depressing walkthrough of the entire house, double-checking every lock, securing every window latch, taking a detailed mental and photographic inventory of our belongings, a persistent, uncomfortable, almost nauseating knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach with every room I entered, every closet I peered into. The pervasive, insidious feeling of our home being contaminated, as Liam had so aptly, so painfully put it after that first disastrous, invasive visit, lingered in the air like a bad, unshakable smell. Every unexpected creak of the old floorboards, every rustle of leaves skittering across the deck outside the window driven by the autumn wind, made me jump, half expecting, with a jolt of pure dread, to find Chloe materializing in a doorway with a new, even more outrageous demand, or worse, to find tangible, irrefutable evidence of a clandestine, unauthorized entry during our absence. The family retreat Chloe had so blithely, so dishonestly, so infuriatingly advertised on her carefully curated social media feeds felt less like a haven of peace and tranquility and more like a potential high-stakes crime scene in waiting, a stage being set for a drama we desperately wanted no part of. The direct calls and texts from Chloe herself, perhaps sensing a subtle but significant shift in our resolve, or maybe just momentarily exhausted from her own relentless histrionics and scheming, did continue, though perhaps with a slightly less frequent, less overtly aggressive cadence than before, as if she were temporarily regrouping, recalibrating her strategy, plotting her next, undoubtedly more cunning, move in this bizarre, exhausting war of attrition she seemed so determined to wage. The crocodile tears act with Mrs. Evans, however, her primary and most effective conduit for emotional manipulation and guilt-tripping, unfortunately reached new, almost operatic heights of theatricality and shameless fabrication. One dreary Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Evans called Liam at his office, her voice trembling so violently, so authentically, with what sounded like profound, unmitigated distress, that he initially, with a surge of genuine alarm, thought something truly terrible, some genuine life-altering tragedy had befallen the family, a serious accident, a sudden illness. Liam, she sobbed, her words punctuated by a series of gulping, gasping, heart-wrenching breaths that sounded utterly convincing even over the phone line. You have to help your sister. You just have to do something. She's in a terrible, terrible, desperate state. Derek, oh, Liam, poor Derek. He lost his job, his company. They had massive, unexpected layoffs this morning. No warning, no severance, nothing. They're going to be evicted from their apartment by the end of the month. The children, my precious, innocent grandbabies, they'll be out on the cold, hard street. And it's all because she was so incredibly, debilitatingly upset and distracted about the whole terrible lake house misunderstanding. She just couldn't concentrate. She's been a complete nervous wreck, a shadow of her former self, and poor dear Derek was so worried sick about her, so consumed with her distress, he made some dreadful, unforgivable mistake at work, and now this disaster. The sheer, unmitigated, breathtaking audacity of so blatantly, so transparently linking Derek's supposed conveniently timed sudden job loss, if it was even remotely true, which I doubted profoundly, to our entirely reasonable, repeatedly stated refusal to hand over our private personal home for her ill-conceived, half-baked Airbnb scheme was almost comical in its villainous absurdity if it weren't so transparently, so infuriatingly, so despicably manipulative. She said, she told me through her uncontrollable tears, Liam, Mrs. Evans continued, her voice thick, with a shared, vicarious sorrow that felt utterly manufactured to me. If only you'd been a little kinder, a little more understanding, a little more generous, and let her run that little Airbnb. Just as she so reasonably asked, they'd have an income, a safety net. They'd be safe and secure. Oh, Liam, how could you be so heartless, so cruel, so unfeeling to your own flesh and blood, to your only devoted sister in her darkest hour of desperate, pitiable need? Liam, To his immense, almost superhuman credit, and despite the years, the decades of carefully conditioned guilt and familial obligation weighing down on him, managed to remain outwardly impressively calm, though I, knowing him so intimately, could see the visible turmoil churning just beneath the surface in the tightening of his jaw, the slight tremor in his hand as he held the phone. The carefully painted, deeply distressing image of his young, innocent nieces and nephews, potentially homeless, however unlikely or fabricated the surrounding scenario might be, did clearly, understandably, give him a significant moment's pause, a flicker of doubt in his usually resolute eyes. "Mom," he asked, his voice carefully, deliberately neutral, attempting with admirable patience to cut through the thick, cloying fog of her emotional distress and get to some semblance of verifiable, concrete details. "Are you absolutely, positively sure about this? Derek definitively, unequivocally lost his job today? When exactly did this happen? What was the name of the company again? Did they offer any kind of outplacement services?" Mrs. Evans, predictably, when pressed for specifics, became immediately suspiciously vague, her answers evasive, contradictory, and unsatisfying. Recently, just now, practically, Chloe is far, far too distraught, too shattered to go into all the horrible, painful little details with me. All I know for certain, Liam, is that they're desperate, utterly, completely, hopelessly desperate. You simply have to let them stay at the lake house. It's your Christian duty. Just for a little while, a few short months, until they can somehow, miraculously, get back on their feet. It's just sitting there empty most of the time anyway, isn't it? What earthly, conceivable harm could it possibly do to let your own family use it in an emergency? There it was again, that familiar, insidious, manipulative refrain, her go-to rhetorical question. What harm could it do? The potential harm, as we were both beginning to understand with ever-increasing, chilling clarity, was practically limitless, boundless, when Chloe and her distorted, self-serving sense of reality, not to mention her proven track record of dishonesty, were involved in the equation. I'll have to think about it, Mom," Liam said finally, his voice flat, offering a deliberately non-committal delaying answer designed solely and exclusively to end the distressing, circular, and ultimately pointless call before he said something he might later regret, or before she wore him down completely. He hung up the phone with a sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of his weary, battered soul and looked across the room at me, his face a deeply etched mask of worry, internal conflict, and profound, almost unbearable exhaustion. Do you think any of that, any part of that, could possibly be true this time?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, though I could tell from the look in his eyes that he already suspected, with a heavy heart, the almost certain, deeply unpleasant answer. I shook my head slowly, a sad, bitter certainty settling over me like a shroud. "With Chloe, Liam? Honestly, it's always 50-50 at the very, very best of times, and usually, as we both know from painful past experience, closer to 90-10 or even 99-1, in favor of a complete, utter, and shameless fabrication designed for maximum emotional impact. But even if, by some vanishingly small, statistically improbable miracle, it is true this time, even if Derek, against all odds, genuinely lost his job today, letting them move into the lake house, especially under these highly charged, manipulative circumstances, would be a catastrophically, monumentally terrible idea, Liam. You know as well as I do, probably better, they'll never, ever leave. It won't be a temporary solution to a temporary problem. It'll instantly become their new, permanent, rent-free, consequence-free entitlement. And we'll have an even bigger, more intractable nightmare on our hands. Sophia's unerring, almost uncanny instincts regarding Chloe's capacity for deceit, as they so often were, proved to be devastatingly, depressingly spot on. A few discreet, carefully worded, and entirely off-the-record inquiries made by a trusted, well-connected friend of Liam's who happened to work in human resources in a similar heavy manufacturing industry to Derek's, a friend who, it must be said, owed Liam a significant, long-standing favor for some astute career advice years prior. Quickly, unequivocally, and with a depressing lack of surprise on our part, revealed the unvarnished, unpalatable truth. Derek, far from having tragically, unexpectedly lost his job due to some mythical company-wide layoff, hadn't lost his job at all. In fact, quite the contrary. He'd recently, within the last month, received a small but significant promotion to a shift supervisor position, accompanied by a modest but noticeable corresponding raise in his hourly wage. The entire heart-wrenching, elaborately constructed story of his sudden, devastating unemployment, their impending Dickensian eviction, and the imminent prospect of his innocent children being cast out onto the cold, hard streets was a complete, utterly shameless, and morally bankrupt fabrication from start to finish. It was, we realized with a fresh wave of weary disgust, yet another desperate, despicable, and frankly, rather pathetic ploy designed to viciously guilt-trip Liam into finally, irrevocably, capitulating and giving them unfettered, rent-free access to the lake house, their El Dorado of unearned comfort and potential illicit income. When Liam, armed with this new, irrefutable, and deeply damning information, confronted Mrs. Evans with the truth, gently, respectfully, but with an unwavering firmness, presenting the anonymized but entirely verifiable proof of Derek's continued employment and recent promotion, she initially, stubbornly, and with a theatrical display of maternal indignation, refused to believe it. Chloe wouldn't lie about something so serious, Liam. She just wouldn't. There must be some dreadful mistake. Your friend must be misinformed, she insisted, her voice trembling with a potent mixture of outraged denial and a dawning uncomfortable flicker of doubt in her eyes. But when Liam calmly, patiently, and without accusation, laid out the undeniable, corroborated evidence, point by painful point, Mrs. Evans fell into a long, uncharacteristic, and deeply unsettling silence on the other end of the line. Then, instead of offering even a token apology for being so easily, so thoroughly duped by her daughter's pathological dishonesty, instead of expressing even a shred of remorse for the immense unnecessary stress and anguish she'd once again inflicted upon her own son with her relentless, baseless accusations, she said, her voice devoid of its earlier hysterical fervor, but still stubbornly, defiantly laced with a stubborn, unyielding refusal to concede any wrongdoing on Chloe's part. Well, even if Derek still has his job, Liam, they're clearly not managing their money very well, are they? If they were, Chloe wouldn't be so desperate, so unhappy. They obviously still need significant help, and you still have that big, beautiful empty house just sitting there, not being used to its full potential. The goalpost, with a breathtaking, almost admirable shamelessness, had effortlessly, seamlessly shifted yet again. But the underlying, unyielding, non-negotiable objective remained precisely, depressingly the same. Liam must provide. Liam must sacrifice. Liam must endlessly cater to Chloe's every whim, every demand, every fabricated crisis, regardless of the truth, regardless of the blatant dishonesty, regardless of the significant personal and emotional cost to himself or to his own immediate family. It was at that precise, soul-destroying and utterly disillusioning moment that Liam, his heart heavy with a grief that went far beyond the current situation, a grief for the mother he wished he had, for the family he yearned for, quietly, sadly, but with an unshakable resolve, told his mother that he would be significantly, and for the foreseeable future, limiting contact with her for the sake of his own mental, emotional, and frankly fiscal well-being. He simply couldn't, he explained, keep having these circular, emotionally draining, psychologically damaging, and ultimately fruitless conversations that always ended with him feeling like a villain for simply trying to protect his own hard-earned assets and his own peace of mind. The terror campaign, as we bitterly, privately started calling it in the relative sanctuary of our own city apartment, wasn't just emanating from Chloe anymore. If it ever truly had been solely her doing, his own mother, whether wittingly or unwittingly, whether through active malice or simply pathological denial, had undeniably become a key, indispensable, if perhaps willingly blind, accomplice in her daughter's relentless, destructive psychological warfare. The recent extensive installation of the comprehensive state-of-the-art security cameras, the reinforced locks on every door and window, the jarringly loud motion detectors. They suddenly felt less like an over-the-top, paranoid precaution, and more like an absolute, non-negotiable, and tragically necessary defense for what was increasingly, alarmingly, and with a growing sense of inevitability, feeling like an impending, unavoidable, and potentially very ugly siege. The self-imposed and frankly much-needed limited contact with Mrs. Evans, while a painful but ultimately necessary step for Liam's sanity, did bring about a deceptive, almost eerie, and deeply unsettling lull in the overt hostilities. Chloe's direct, abusive calls and her barrage of manipulative text messages dwindled to a mere sporadic trickle, then, for a blessed, unbelievable few weeks, stopped altogether, replaced by a brooding, unnerving, and profoundly uncomfortable silence that felt far more ominous, far more pregnant with unspoken, unarticulated threats and simmering resentment than her previous, almost constant onslaught of overt, obnoxious aggression. It was the oppressive, suffocating quiet before a particularly violent, destructive summer thunderstorm, a feeling amplified, intensified, and brought into sharp, terrifying focus by a strange, deeply unsettling, and entirely unexpected encounter that occurred during one of our now routine, almost militaristic weekend trips up to the lake house. Trips undertaken ostensibly, according to our carefully constructed public narrative, to relax and enjoy the scenery, but mostly, if we were being brutally honest with ourselves, to meticulously check on our newly fortified, but in our minds, still potentially vulnerable, hard-won sanctuary. As we were methodically unloading groceries from the car, one crisp Saturday morning, our reclusive, almost hermit-like elderly neighbor from across the narrow, tree-lined, unpaved dirt road, Mr. Peterson, a man of remarkably, almost legendarily, few words with whom we'd previously only ever exchanged polite, nearly monosyllabic, and entirely perfunctory nods of acknowledgement over the shared fence line, ambled slowly, deliberately, with a surprising sense of purpose, over to our gravel driveway. He was stooped with age, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time, and, I suspected, a fair amount of solitude. But his eyes, when they met ours, were surprisingly sharp, alert, keenly observant, and missed very, very little. His unexpected, unannounced visit, given his usual solitary, almost invisible habits, immediately put us both on high, prickling alert. Afternoon, he rasped, his voice dry and crackly like piles of autumn leaves, skittering across asphalt, his gaze I noticed with a sudden lurch of my stomach taking in the newly installed, gleaming, and rather conspicuous security cameras mounted discreetly but visibly under the eaves of our house with a flicker of something unreadable. Curiosity? Approval? Disapproval? Figured I probably should mention, he continued, getting straight to the point without any preamble, seeing as you folks seem to be having a bit of bother. I saw your sister, Chloe, I believe her name is, loud woman, distinctive perfume, and that husband of hers, Derek, the quiet one, up here a couple of times last month. Middle of the week it was, both times, when your car, that sensible Subaru of yours, definitely wasn't anywhere around. Liam and I exchanged a quick, loaded, almost imperceptible glance. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. The bottom seemed to drop out of my stomach, leaving a cold, hollow sensation. "Oh?" Liam said, his voice admirably, almost preternaturally, casual, betraying none of the sudden, sickening lurch of anxiety and rising anger I knew he must be feeling. The same anxiety and anger that was currently churning through me. Just, looking around, I guess, checking on the place for us. Mister. Peterson snorted, a short, dry, rustling sound that conveyed a wealth of deeply ingrained, world-weary skepticism. "Looking around, and then some, son," he said, his gaze unwavering. "A whole lot more than just looking around, if you ask me. They had another woman with them one of those times. Younger than them, I'd say by a good 10, 15 years. Dressed real smart, all businesslike, like a city type. Carried one of them fancy, expensive-looking leather briefcases full of papers. My blood ran cold, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling with a sudden, horrible premonition. They were all over your property," he continued, his gaze sweeping our house and yard with a slow, deliberate movement, back and front, side to side, pointing at things, gesturing, measuring stuff too, with one of those long, yellow, retractable tape measures the kind builders use. The woman, the city one, she had one of those clipboard things, looked like she was taking a whole mess of notes, drawing little pictures, diagrams maybe. Even heard them talking loud enough for me to catch bits and pieces of it over here on my porch. Something about definitely knocking out that interior load-bearing wall for a better, more marketable open concept flow, and absolutely maximizing guest occupancy and nightly rental rates for the upcoming peak tourist season. Didn't sound like any kind of casual, friendly family visit to me, son. Nosery. Sounded more like they were casing the joint for a burglary, or maybe planning a full-scale, unauthorized, and probably illegal dam renovation. The information delivered in Mr. Peterson's unhurried, almost laconic, matter-of-fact monotone hit us with the combined force of a physical blow and an emotional depth charge. Measuring, knocking out load-bearing walls, maximizing guest occupancy. This wasn't just about Chloe wanting to use the house for free anymore, or even about her half-baked, ill-conceived Airbnb scheme where she'd be the self-appointed commission-gouging manager. This was something far more insidious, far more audacious, far more permanent. This was a premeditated, clandestine, and utterly terrifying plan to significantly, irrevocably alter our property, to physically, structurally transform it into her idealized, high-volume, profit-generating Airbnb fantasy, likely without our knowledge, and most certainly, unequivocally, without our consent or permission. The other woman, the smart, professional city type with the clipboard and the leather briefcase, we surmised with a shared, dawning, sickening wave of horror, must have been an architect, an interior designer, or perhaps some sort of unscrupulous Airbnb consultant or property developer. Chloe had somehow managed to rope into her delusional, grandiose scheme with promises of future profits, or perhaps by leveraging some unknown past obligation. Chloe wasn't just an entitled, manipulative, and persistent family nuisance anymore. She was actively, covertly, and with a chilling degree of premeditation plotting a hostile takeover, a stealthy, underhanded annexation of our home, our dream, our future. Did you happen to catch this other woman's name, mister? Peterson? I asked, my voice remarkably, almost unnaturally calm, a stark, deliberate contrast to the furious, frantic, almost hysterical storm raging just beneath the surface of my carefully maintained composure. He shook his head slowly, his weathered face impassive. "Afraid not, ma'am. Didn't get close enough for names, and wasn't about to go asking, if you take my meaning. But they weren't exactly being discreet or quiet about it all, I can tell you that much for free. Strutting around your yard like they own the damn place already, or were fully expecting to in the very near future." He gave another curt, almost dismissive, nod as if he'd now successfully delivered his unwelcome but necessary parcel of news, and his neighborly duty, as he saw it, was therefore duly, fully discharged. He then ambled slowly, with no further comment, back across the dusty road to his own quiet, unassuming property, leaving Liam and me reeling in the sudden, oppressive, sun-drenched silence, the half-unloaded grocery bags completely forgotten at our feet, their contents slowly warming in the afternoon sun. The sheer, breathtaking, almost unbelievable audacity of Chloe's actions was one thing. We'd almost tragically become accustomed to that from her over the years. But the calculated, clandestine, almost conspiratorial nature of this new, deeply alarming development was genuinely, profoundly terrifying. Chloe wasn't just a persistent, annoying family nuisance anymore, someone to be managed with carefully worded refusals and firm boundaries. She was, we now realized with a chilling certainty, a clear and present, and potentially very destructive threat to our property, our peace of mind, and perhaps even our long-term financial well-being if she somehow managed to incur significant debts or legal liabilities against our home in pursuit of her harebrained schemes. That evening, Liam, his face set in grim, determined, almost stony lines that I hadn't seen since a particularly brutal and protracted corporate negotiation he'd successfully navigated years ago, upgraded our already comprehensive security plan yet again, this time with a vengeance that bordered on paranoia, but a paranoia I now fully shared. He changed all the digital access codes to the house itself and to the newly installed heavy-duty electronic gate at the end of our long, secluded driveway. He meticulously, painstakingly reinforced a back utility room window that looked, upon closer, more critical inspection, a little more vulnerable, a little more easily breached than the others. We even had a serious, lengthy, and somewhat depressing discussion about placing discreet but unambiguous, legally sound, no trespassing, property monitored by 24/7 video surveillance, violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, signs at strategic, highly visible points around the entire perimeter of our property, though we ultimately, reluctantly, held off on that overtly aggressive step, not wanting to completely escalate things visually, not wanting to make our intended sanctuary look exactly like the Fort Knox it was rapidly, necessarily, becoming, unless it became absolutely unavoidable and strategically necessary to do so. We also, on the advice of a lawyer friend we consulted in hushed, urgent tones, started a meticulously detailed, contemporaneously recorded written log, a precise chronology of every single interaction, every manipulative phone call, every abusive text message, every suspicious incident, however minor or seemingly insignificant it might have appeared at the time, complete with exact dates, precise times, and, where possible, verbatim quotes from Chloe, Derek, or Mrs. Evans. It felt disturbingly, dishearteningly, like we were methodically, painstakingly building a legal case against our own family, and the thought was as profoundly depressing and emotionally draining as it was infuriating and, sadly, necessary. The next major, earth-shattering, and utterly paradigm-shifting twist in this increasingly surreal, almost unbelievable, and deeply painful family saga came, once again, and perhaps not surprisingly, via Liam's perpetually conflicted father, Mr. Evans. After many more weeks of near-total, deafening silence from that particular quarter of the family, a silence punctuated only by Mrs. Evans's occasional, dramatically tearful, and increasingly ignored guilt-inducing voicemails, which Liam, on my increasingly firm and insistent advice, had started to diligently, ruthlessly ignore, letting them go straight to the digital ether of his voicemail inbox, unlistened to and undeleted. A small, silent testament to his fractured maternal relationship. Mr. Evans called Liam directly, late one weekday evening, on his personal cell phone, his voice uncharacteristically grave, almost somber, and imbued with a hesitant and reluctant quality that immediately set off alarm bells in Liam's already frayed psyche. "Liam, son," he began, without any of his usual awkward preamble or hesitant small talk, his voice low and strained. I need to talk to you. Urgently. It's important. About Chloe. And, well, about your mother too, I suppose. It's all connected." Liam braced himself, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone tightly, his mind automatically cycling through a wearying litany of potential new horrors. Had Chloe fabricated another, even more outlandish financial crisis? Had Derek finally gotten himself fired for real this time? Was Mrs. Evans about to unleash another, even more potent, guilt-laden offensive? He expected another wearying lecture about family duty, another desperate, misguided plea for him to be the bigger person and somehow, magically, capitulate to Chloe's latest unspoken but undoubtedly outrageous demands. But what came next was far more shocking, far more destabilizing, far more fundamentally world-altering than anything he could have possibly, in his wildest, most stressed-out imaginings, anticipated. "There's something you don't know, Liam, Mr. Evans said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming hesitant, almost furtive, freighted with the unmistakable, palpable weight of a long-held, deeply buried, and clearly painful secret. Something we, your mother and I, should have told you many, many, many years ago. When you were old enough to understand, it explains a lot, I think. Or at least, I hope it will. About your mother's often baffling behavior. Her almost pathological inability to see Chloe clearly, to ever hold her accountable. About Chloe herself, perhaps. About some of her deep-seated issues." He paused, and Liam could hear him take a long, ragged, unsteady, almost shuddering breath on the other end of the line, as if he were physically steeling himself for a difficult, painful, and long overdue confession. Liam, Chloe isn't your mother's biological daughter. She's my niece, son, my late younger sister's child, Sarah's little girl. We adopted her, legally and fully adopted her, when she was just a tiny, helpless baby, not even 6 months old, right after my sister, your Aunt Sarah, passed away so suddenly, so tragically, from that aggressive brain tumor. Your mother, God bless her soul, she's always loved Chloe, I know she has, in her own way, but she's also, from that day to this, always felt this tremendous, overwhelming, almost crushing guilt, this profound, unshakable sense of obligation to give Chloe absolutely everything she could possibly desire, to somehow, impossibly, make up for the biological mother she lost so young, for the life she might have had if Sarah had lived. It's why she spoils her so rotten, Liam, why she's always indulged her every whim, why she simply can't, or more accurately, won't, see her glaring, obvious faults, her constant manipulations, her selfishness. I know, I truly know. It's no real excuse, not a justifiable reason, for Chloe's often appalling, destructive behavior now as an adult, or for your mother's consistent, frustrating, and ultimately damaging enabling of it all these years. But I just thought, after everything that's happened, after things have escalated to this dangerous point, you deserved, you needed to finally know the unvarnished truth. The revelation dropped so unexpectedly, so casually almost, into the already turbulent, churning waters of our lives, was like a carefully aimed, precisely detonated bomb exploding in the very foundations of Liam's understanding of his own family, of his own history, of his own identity within that complex, now shattered dynamic. It reframed everything, instantly, irrevocably. His mother's baffling, often infuriating, almost pathological indulgence of Chloe's every whim, every transgression, every outrageous demand. Chloe's deep-seated, almost desperate, seemingly insatiable, voracious sense of entitlement, her constant need for more, for better, for what others possessed, perhaps stemming, Liam now dimly, painfully began to understand, from some unconscious, unarticulated, lifelong awareness of her otherness within the core family dynamic, or perhaps simply the inevitable, tragic result of a lifetime of being treated, not as a responsible individual, but as someone owed a perpetual, unpayable, intergenerational debt of care, material possessions, and unwavering, uncritical loyalty. It even explained, to some deeply unsettling extent, Mr. Evans's perpetual, frustrating, almost cowardly reticence throughout the years, his lifelong, infuriating inability to firmly, decisively, authoritatively intervene in the increasingly dysfunctional, toxic dance between his grieving, guilt-ridden wife and his demanding, manipulative, adopted daughter. He was caught. Liam now realized with a fresh, painful wave of empathy for his father, in an impossible, agonizing, no-win bind between his unwavering, protective loyalty to his fragile, emotionally scarred wife, his complicated, undoubtedly conflicted, and perhaps ultimately inadequate love for the little girl he had taken in and raised as his own flesh and blood, and his quiet, often unvoiced, but clearly present, concern for the emotional and financial well-being of his biological son, who was so often, so consistently, so unfairly, the unacknowledged collateral damage in their twisted, unresolved, multi-generational family psychodrama. Why in God's name didn't you ever tell me, Dad? Liam finally managed to ask, his voice hollow, barely a recognizable whisper, the simple question laced with decades of unspoken bewilderment, of unarticulated hurt, of a childhood spent navigating confusing, unfair loyalties. All these years, knowing this, it might have helped me understand Mom a little better, maybe even Chloe, maybe even myself. I'm so sorry, son, Mr. Evans said, his voice thick with a regret that sounded as old, as deep, and as painful as the 30-year-old secret itself. We genuinely, truly thought it was for the best at the time, to protect everyone, to keep things simpler, less complicated. Your mother especially was absolutely adamant that no one outside our immediate tiny family circle ever know the truth. But seeing how things are escalating now, how completely out of control, how dangerous Chloe has become, I just couldn't in good conscience keep it from you any longer. It simply wasn't fair to you, son. It never was. But listen to me now, Liam. Please listen very carefully. Be careful. Please be very, very careful with both of them. Chloe, when she feels cornered, when her back is truly against the wall and she feels she has nothing left to lose, she can be incredibly reckless, even vindictive, even destructive. And your mother, God help us all, will defend her, will enable her, will make excuses for her, no matter what she does, no matter how outrageous, no matter who gets hurt in the process. Mr. Evans's grave, heartfelt, and deeply unsettling warning proved to be chillingly, tragically prophetic. The final, explosive, and in many ways, inevitable act in this protracted, agonizing, and increasingly bizarre family drama unfolded, with a kind of grim, almost theatrical inevitability, on a cold, blustery, classic Pacific Northwest Thanksgiving weekend, a holiday traditionally fraught with a low level of simmering Evans family tension, but never before with this degree of overt, impending menace. Liam and I, in a conscious, deliberate, and somewhat defiant act of personal and proprietary reclamation, had decided to actually use our lake house for the extended holiday weekend to try and reclaim some small sense of normalcy, of ownership, of simple, uncomplicated peace within its besieged walls. We'd invited a few close, understanding, and blessedly drama-free friends, people who knew some, though certainly not all, of the ongoing, sordid family saga, determined to create some genuinely positive, happy, and uncomplicated memories in a place that had, up until that precise moment, become almost exclusively and depressingly a source of unrelenting stress, pervasive anxiety, and a deep, simmering, bitter resentment. We informed Liam's parents of our plans more as a carefully worded, non-negotiable courtesy notification, a statement of established fact, rather than any kind of genuine invitation, knowing full well from past experience that Mrs. Evans would likely disapprove, or at the very least, find some way to inject a note of passive-aggressive guilt into the proceedings. And she did Her voice on the phone when Liam informed her of their plans, coolly disapproving, laced with subtle, skillfully worded accusations of our insensitivity and selfishness in flaunting our good fortune, while poor Chloe was struggling so terribly. From Chloe herself and from Derek, we heard absolutely nothing in the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, a profound, almost deafening silence that, in retrospect, given their previous patterns of behavior, was far more unnerving, far more unsettling than her usual constant barrage of demands and accusations. On the Friday after Thanksgiving, a day traditionally meant in our circle for consuming copious amounts of leftover turkey sandwiches, engaging in fiercely competitive but ultimately good-natured board games, and enjoying long, lazy, wine-fueled conversations by a roaring fire, as we were actually miraculously enjoying a quiet, peaceful, almost normal evening with our small group of supportive friends, the newly upgraded, state-of-the-art, and until that precise moment, blessedly silent security system, suddenly, violently, and with a piercing, ear-splitting electronic shriek blared to life, ripping through the otherwise tranquil, fire-lit atmosphere of the house like a physical, brutal assault. My phone, which I had thankfully left on the coffee table beside me, connected via Wi-Fi to the live camera feeds, buzzed and vibrated frantically, insistently against the polished wood. Liam and I exchanged a single, heart-stopping, almost telepathic look of pure, unadulterated, sickening dread before I snatched up the phone, my fingers fumbling, clumsy with adrenaline, as I frantically tried to open the security app. The image that greeted us on the small, brightly lit screen was both sickeningly, depressingly familiar in its cast of unwelcome characters, yet shockingly, horrifyingly, almost surreally brazen in its current unfolding execution. Derek, Chloe's hapless, easily led, and apparently now terminally stupid husband, was on our property again. And he wasn't just visiting or checking on things this time, he was actively, unmistakably, and with a terrifying degree of focused intent trying to break into our goddamn house. One strategically placed, high-resolution camera, positioned near the back utility gate, which led to a less visible part of the property, showed him struggling, then with a grunt of effort, succeeding with what looked like a pair of heavy-duty, industrial-strength bolt cutters on the thick, hardened steel, industrial-grade chain Liam had painstakingly installed just weeks before as a primary deterrent. Another camera, mounted discreetly but with a clear line of sight near a less used, somewhat more vulnerable side door, showed him prying aggressively, violently, at the newly reinforced, dead-bolted lock set with a long, wicked-looking, heavy steel crowbar, his face, even in the grainy infrared night vision, contorted in a terrifying mask of drunken determination, simmering resentment, and frustrated, almost desperate rage. "He's actually doing it," Liam whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible above the continued deafening shriek of the alarm system, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a potent, sickening mixture of disbelief, outrage, and a terrible, dawning, inevitable fury. The stupid, goddamn, arrogant son of a bitch is actually physically breaking into our home. Our friends, decent, normal people, unaccustomed to this level of brazen, criminal, familial dysfunction, sensing the immediate, palpable, and undeniable gravity of the unfolding situation, fell instantly, completely silent. Their earlier light-hearted conversation, their laughter, their clinking wine glasses utterly forgotten, replaced by wide, shocked, disbelieving eyes. My hands, I realized with a detached sort of surprise, were shaking uncontrollably, almost violently, as I somehow, through a fog of adrenaline and rising panic, managed to accurately dial 911, my voice. When I finally found it, surprisingly, almost preternaturally steady and clear as I rapidly, concisely relayed our exact address, the nature of the ongoing emergency, a break-in in progress, and the crucial, terrifying fact that we, the homeowners, along with several guests, were currently inside the house with the intruder actively, violently attempting to gain entry. The nearest county sheriff's department, as we knew all too well from our previous, less dire, but still concerning, inquiries into local response times, was a good, nerve-wracking, and in this specific life or death context, seemingly interminable 20-minute drive away, an absolute terrifying eternity when your home, your sanctuary, your very safety is actively, physically under siege by a determined, potentially armed, and clearly intoxicated, enraged assailant. We watched, transfixed with a sickening, almost paralyzing blend of raw horror, helpless fury, and a desperate primal fear on the small, flickering screen of my phone as Derek, after apparently failing to breach the heavily reinforced and dead-bolted side door, moved with a stumbling, uncertain, clearly drunken gait to a small, somewhat obscured utility room window at the rear of the house. A window that, in our otherwise comprehensive fortification efforts, we had perhaps foolishly, tragically overlooked as a potential point of ingress. He smashed the small, single pane of glass with the heavy butt of the crowbar, the sharp, distinct, sickening sound of shattering glass, even muffled and slightly distorted through the phone's tiny speaker, making us all jump violently. One of our friends letting out a small, involuntary gasp of fear. He reached a gloved hand in through the jagged opening, fumbled for a moment, and then, with a small, triumphant grunt, unlatched the window from the inside. A moment later, an internal motion sensor, one of the many sensitive, strategically placed devices Liam had painstakingly installed throughout the interior of the house, tripped with an audible electronic click that we could actually hear, even over the continued relentless blare of the external alarm and the pounding of our own hearts in our ears. He was inside. "They're here," Liam said, his voice grim, almost calm now with a terrifying sort of fatalistic resolve, as the distinctive rising and falling. Unmistakable wail of multiple sheriff's cruisers, their powerful sirens finally blessedly cutting through the cold, dark, oppressive night air, at long last reached our straining ears. We'd already frantically informed the 911 dispatcher that we were still inside the house, though on her urgent, repeated, and very firm advice, we'd quietly retreated from the main living area to the master bedroom at the far end of the house, locked the solid, heavy oak door, and, in a surge of adrenaline-fueled desperation, managed to shove a heavy antique dresser in front of it as a makeshift last-ditch barricade, just in case. The next few minutes, which stretched out into what felt like an agonizing, breathless eternity, were an absolute, terrifying, almost surreal blur of heightened adrenaline, heart-stopping fear, and hushed, urgent, whispered communication with the remarkably calm and professional 911 dispatcher who stayed on the line with us, a reassuring, disembodied voice in the terrifying darkness. We heard shouting from downstairs, muffled at first, then clearer, louder, more authoritative, the unmistakable, commanding voices of the deputies. "Sheriff's Department, open up. Show yourself with your hands in the air, now." Then, a different kind of silence descended, a tense, charged, pregnant, quiet, punctuated only by the staccato, almost rhythmic crackle of police radios, the heavy, deliberate thud of multiple pairs of boots on our pristine hardwood floors, and the occasional, muffled, angry-sounding male voice, Derek's, we presumed, still belligerent, still unrepentant. A uniformed sheriff's deputy, a young, competent-looking woman with a calm, reassuring, no-nonsense demeanor and kind eyes, eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes, knocked firmly, authoritatively, on our locked and barricaded bedroom door. "Mr. and Mrs. Evans," she called out, her voice clear and strong. "This is Sheriff's Deputy Miller. It's all clear. It's safe for you and your guest to come out now. The suspect is in custody. Derek." We learned shortly thereafter as we emerged, shaken but unharmed, from our self-imposed fortress, had been caught utterly, unequivocally, red-handed, literally, the incriminating bolt cutters and the heavy crowbar still clutched in his trembling, gloved hands, standing, bewildered, disoriented, and belligerently drunk in the middle of our small, previously orderly utility room, reeking of stale beer, cheap whiskey, and utter pathetic failure. He was, according to Deputy Miller, drunk, highly argumentative, and had initially, pathetically, almost comically, tried to claim he was just checking on the place for Liam, you know, making sure everything was secure for him, like a good brother-in-law does. The deputies, armed with our previous meticulously documented reports of his and Chloe's escalating harassment and multiple trespassing incidents, not to mention the damning, irrefutable live video evidence of his violent, forced entry captured by our security system, and the impressive array of professional-grade burglary tools found on his person and in his nearby parked vehicle, weren't buying his ludicrous, transparently false story for a single solitary second. He was arrested on the spot, read his Miranda rights, and charged with a slew of serious felony offenses, including, but not limited to, breaking and entering with intent, felony destruction of private property, possession of burglary tools, and aggravated trespassing. As they led him away in handcuffs towards the waiting, brightly lit patrol car, his brief, misguided career as a master criminal clearly over, he turned and, with a final, impotent burst of alcohol-fueled rage, screamed a string of incoherent, vile, and deeply threatening obscenities at our house, at Liam specifically, promising Liam would pay dearly for this, that he'd get him good when he eventually got out. The next inevitable and entirely predictable phone call, of course, was from a hysterical, shrieking, almost unhinged Chloe, her voice a near unintelligible, high-pitched torrent of wild accusations, tearful denials, and frantic, desperate demands, insisting that Liam immediately call off the cops, drop all the ridiculous, trumped-up charges, and somehow magically make this whole terrible, unfortunate misunderstanding disappear, accusing him, among other things, of ruining their lives forever, of vindictively trying to send her innocent, hard-working husband to jail over a stupid, insignificant, drunken misunderstanding. Liam, his voice now devoid of any lingering warmth, any trace of sympathy, any remaining shred of familial obligation or misplaced loyalty, simply coldly informed her that the matter was now firmly, irrevocably in the hands of the law, and that he would be cooperating fully, enthusiastically, with the prosecution to ensure justice was served, then calmly, deliberately, and with a profound, almost cleansing sense of finality, hung up on her mid-shriek. Then, just as predictably, perhaps even more so, came the almost immediate follow-up call from Mrs. Evans. A veritable, overwhelming deluge of well-rehearsed tears, heart-wrenching accusations, desperate pleas for mercy, and the same old, tired, emotionally manipulative blackmail tactics that had, for so many years, proven so tragically effective. How could you do this to your own family, Liam? How could you be so cruel, so unforgiving to your poor sister, to your brother-in-law? Derek made a terrible, terrible mistake. He was drunk. He didn't know what he was doing. He's not a bad person, Liam. He's just misguided sometimes. You have to tell the police it was all just a silly, unfortunate misunderstanding that you don't want to press any charges. For my sake, Liam, for the family's sake. Mom, Liam said, his voice utterly, profoundly weary, drained of all emotion save for a cold, hard, unshakable resolve that I had never heard in him before. A resolve forged in the crucible of too many betrayals, too many disappointments. He broke into our home. He smashed our window. He came armed with tools specifically designed to do more damage, to steal, to violate. He terrified our guests. He threatened us. This isn't a mistake, Mom. This isn't a silly misunderstanding. This is a felony. Several felonies, in fact. And he, and by extension Chloe, will finally, at long last, face the real-world consequences for their repeated destructive actions. I will absolutely, unequivocally not be dropping any of the charges. This behavior, this entitlement, this utter lack of respect, it ends now. It ends tonight. He then proceeded to calmly, dispassionately, and with a chilling degree of precision, detail for her the irrefutable evidence, the heavy-duty bolt cutters, the industrial crowbar, the smashed utility room window, the live, undeniable camera footage of the entire break-in attempt, Derek's drunken, belligerent state, his subsequent violent threats. For the very first time in this entire, godforsaken, multi-year saga of manipulation and abuse, Mrs. Evans was completely, utterly, profoundly silent on the other end of the line. Perhaps finally, belatedly, with the cold, hard reality of jail time and criminal records staring her in the face, grasping the undeniable, inescapable severity of the situation her beloved daughter and son-in-law had created for themselves. Or perhaps, more likely, simply stunned into temporary speechlessness by Liam's newfound, unwavering, and entirely unexpected steely resolve. The subsequent legal process was, as these things often are, protracted, unpleasant, emotionally draining, and, at times, almost surreally ugly. Chloe, true to her manipulative, underhanded form, tried every dirty, desperate trick in the book, and then invented a few new ones in an attempt to derail the prosecution, to intimidate us into dropping the charges, or at the very least, to salvage her own rapidly disintegrating reputation. She launched a vicious, slanderous, public shaming campaign against Liam and me on various social media platforms, filled with outrageous lies and distortions, which, much to her chagrin and our quiet satisfaction, backfired spectacularly when Mr. Peterson, our formerly reclusive but now surprisingly outspoken neighbor, and several other previously silent but observant local residents who had also witnessed her and Derek's past suspicious antics and increasingly brazen trespassing visits to our property started posting detailed, factual, and highly credible counter-comments, complete with approximate dates, times, and eyewitness accounts. She made tearful, histrionic, manipulative appeals to distant, unsuspecting, and easily swayed relatives, begging them to intervene, to pressure Liam into showing some Christian mercy, and not destroying a young family over a minor lapse in judgment. She even, in a truly desperate and pathetic move, managed to plant a wildly fabricated, tear-jerking, sob story version of events with a local, notoriously unreliable, and ethically challenged online gossip blog painting Liam as a heartless, Scrooge-like nouveau riche millionaire who was ruthlessly, vindictively persecuting his struggling, down-on-their-luck, salt-of-the-earth sister and brother-in-law out of pure spite and family jealousy. None of it, thankfully, worked. The evidence against Derek, particularly the crystal-clear security camera footage, was simply too overwhelming, too damning, too irrefutable. He eventually, on the increasingly frantic advice of his beleaguered, overworked public defender, who clearly saw the writing on the wall, pleaded guilty to several of the lesser, though still serious, charges in a plea bargain agreement to avoid a much harsher and almost certain potential sentence had the case gone to a full jury trial. He received a lengthy term of supervised probation. A hefty 5-figure fine was ordered by the court to pay mandatory full restitution for all the damages to our property, which, thankfully, were mostly limited to the broken window, the damaged gate, and some minor cosmetic issues, thanks to the alarm system and the swift police response. And most importantly and satisfyingly to us, was slapped with a strict, multi-year, no-exceptions restraining order, legally prohibiting either him or Chloe from coming anywhere near us, our primary residence in the city, or, most especially, our now heavily fortified and closely monitored lake house, under penalty of immediate arrest and further prosecution. The fallout within the extended Evans family was, predictably, immense, painful, and likely, in some quarters, irreparable. Mrs. Evans, after a long, drawn-out period of icy, disapproving, and pointedly wounded silence, finally, reluctantly reached out to Liam, not, as we had perhaps naively, foolishly hoped, to offer an apology for her decades of enabling behavior, not to express any remorse for her significant role in perpetuating and exacerbating the toxic family dynamic that had led to this disastrous climax, but rather to coldly, formally inform him that she was deeply, profoundly, and permanently hurt by his cruel, unforgiving, and unfamily-like actions, and that their already strained mother-son relationship, in her considered and final estimation, would never ever truly be the same again. Mr. Evans, however, in a quiet, private, and deeply emotional conversation with Liam a few weeks after Derek's sentencing, expressed his unwavering, if belated, support for his son. He told Liam, his voice thick with a mixture of pride and regret, that he was immensely proud of him for finally, courageously, standing his ground, for refusing to be bullied, manipulated, or emotionally blackmailed any longer. He confessed with a sigh of profound, bone-deep weariness that he'd long been worn down, exhausted, and frankly quite ashamed by his wife's intractable, almost pathological inability to see Chloe clearly, to acknowledge her deeply ingrained manipulative nature, her selfishness, her dishonesty. He admitted, his voice cracking slightly, that the long-held, suffocating secret about Chloe's adoption and his wife's subsequent, lifelong, guilt-driven overcompensation had been a heavy, oppressive burden on their marriage, on their entire family, for far too many years, and its eventual, painful, and very public revelation, while undeniably traumatic and deeply unsettling for everyone involved, had also, in a strange, unexpected, and almost paradoxical way, been a sort of profound, cleansing liberation for him personally. As for Chloe and Derek, their messy, irresponsible lives, by all reliable accounts, filtering through the increasingly fractured family grapevine, did indeed begin to significantly, visibly unravel in the months that followed, but not, it must be stressed, primarily because of Liam's actions in pressing charges. Their own chronic, deeply ingrained irresponsibility, their mountain of previously undisclosed and unmanaged debts, their pattern of dishonest dealings, and now Derek's fresh, unexpungible criminal record and the associated legal fees and fines finally, inevitably, and with a kind of grim karmic justice, caught up with them. They were reportedly forced to sell their oversized, gas-guzzling, heavily financed SUV to downsize significantly from their already modest and frequently overdue rental apartment, and Derek, with a recent felony-adjacent conviction now permanently staining his employment record, struggled mightily, and largely unsuccessfully, to find any kind of steady, decent-paying, or even minimally respectable work. The goldmine they had so arrogantly, so covetously, so relentlessly schemed to appropriate, to exploit, to effectively steal at our direct expense, remained firmly, securely, and now peacefully ours. It took a very long, surprisingly difficult, and emotionally taxing time for the lake house to truly, genuinely feel like a sanctuary again, to shed the lingering, invisible but palpable taint of their unwelcome intrusions, their corrosive negativity, their grasping, insatiable greed. The vivid, intrusive memories of the terrifying break-in attempt, the disquieting echoes of Chloe's relentless, multifaceted campaign of harassment and manipulation, the phantom, cloying scent of her once ubiquitous, overpowering floral perfume that seemed to cling to the very air for weeks afterwards. They were hard, stubborn things to shake, like persistent, unwelcome ghosts haunting the otherwise tranquil, beautiful spaces. But slowly, gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, with the steady healing passage of time, with the conscious, deliberate, and joyful creation of new, overwhelmingly positive, and entirely untainted experiences within its welcoming walls, quiet, firelit winter weekends spent reading, talking, and simply reconnecting with each other. Lazy, sun-drenched summer afternoons spent swimming in the cool, clear, refreshing waters of the lake with genuine, respectful friends who cherished our company and respected our clearly defined boundaries, even a tentative, carefully managed, and surprisingly pleasant and peaceful visit from Miss Evans, who seemed lighter, happier, more at peace with himself and the world than Liam had seen him in many, many years. The ugly, damaging stain of their presence, their negativity, their toxicity began to fade, to recede, to eventually almost entirely disappear. We never fully, truly, deeply reconciled with Mrs. Evans. The damage done, the betrayals enacted, the trust shattered, was simply too profound, too extensive, the chasm of misunderstanding and resentment too wide, too deep, to ever be completely, satisfactorily bridged. Chloe and Derek, in our minds and in our lives, became distant, almost mythical cautionary tales, fading, unpleasant specters from a difficult, painful past we were both steadfastly determined and increasingly, joyfully successful at, leaving firmly, irrevocably behind us. The house. Our beautiful, resilient lake house, once a potent, painful symbol of escalating family strife, of unchecked, corrosive entitlement, and perhaps of our own initial, damaging naivety and conflict avoidance, eventually, finally, blessedly, became exactly what we had always, from the very first moment we laid hopeful eyes on its rustic charm and tranquil setting, intended it to be. Our escape, our haven, our hard-won, fiercely protected peace. It stood, and continues to stand, as a quiet, enduring testament not just to our hard work, our financial sacrifice, and our shared dream, but also, and perhaps more importantly, to the even harder, more painful, but ultimately empowering and deeply validating battle of recognizing, setting, and then fiercely, unwaveringly defending essential personal boundaries, even and perhaps most especially against those who may share your blood, your history, your name, but demonstrably, tragically, do not share your values, your respect, or your understanding of what it truly means to be family. The silence, when it finally, truly, deeply settled back into the very bones, the very soul of the lake house, was no longer fragile, tentative, or easily shattered. It was strong, resilient, earned, and entirely, blessedly, wonderfully our own.